to the Making Career Readiness Count conference call. My name is Jeanette, and I will be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. We will conduct a question-and-answer session. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I'll turn the call over to Ann Bowles. Miss, you may begin.
Jeanette, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Making Career Readiness Count. The webinar is designed to provide guidance to states interested in building more indicators of career preparation into their accountability and public reporting systems. Many thanks to everyone who has taken the time out of their very busy schedules to join us on today's webinar. My name is Ann Bowles, and I'm a Senior Policy Associate here with Achieve, and my role today is to introduce the webinar and then turn it over to our speakers. Today's webinar, I'm pleased to say, is a joint webinar between Achieve and the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Education Consortium. Given that, I'm joined on today's webinar by my colleague Marie O'Hara, who is an Associate Director here at Achieve on our State Policy and Implementation Support team, as well as Kate Blasren-Kramer, who is an Associate Executive Director with the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Education Consortium. Both Marie and Kate will kick off the webinar and provide a sneak peek into a new joint brief on how states are incorporating career readiness indicators into their accountability and public reporting systems. Then we'll have an opportunity to hear directly from state leaders in Missouri and Virginia who have taken concrete steps to incorporate these indicators into their systems at the state level. We're delighted to be joined by Dennis Cooper, who's an Assistant Commissioner with the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Dennis Hardin, a Career Education Coordinator also with the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Deborah Jonas, a Special Advisor for Research and Planning with the Virginia Department of Education. Kate Blasren-Kramer will also introduce the speakers again later in the webinar. After we hear directly from the state leaders, we'll then open the lines up to Q&A. So please do be thinking of your questions. Feel free to also use the chat box to ask any questions. As Jeanette noted at the top of the webinar, this webinar is being recorded, so we will be sure to post the recording of the webinar as well as the slides and any resources from today's webinar on Achieve's website at www.achieve.org/meetings-webinars. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marie to provide an overview of the new brief.
Thank you, Ann. And thank you again to all those who have joined us. We really appreciate you taking time out and are very excited to share with you the preview of our joint venture with the folks at the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Ed. So with that, as Ann mentioned, we are soon releasing the new policy brief, Making Career Readiness Count, and this will be proposing an expanded framework for thinking about college and career-ready indicators that really better incorporates indicators that focus on career preparation. We strongly feel that whether high school graduates enroll in a traditional 2- or 4-year institution, whether they enter into a post-secondary technical program or apprenticeship, or whether they go directly into military or the workforce following high school, they really need the same core of academic skills, particularly in English language arts and mathematics. The brief, as we'll get into, includes guidance and recommendations for states on how they can take steps in the next few years to ensure that the career in their college and career-ready accountability and public reporting systems is not merely an afterthought, but really is used as a powerful lever to focus their state's priorities, to drive progress, and to ultimately see more students and more folks in their communities succeed. Importantly, the paper doesn't put forth one specific approach or strategy for valuing college and career readiness. As you all well know, there is no silver bullet, but it really strives to offer a view into how states are currently approaching the challenge, what policymakers might consider as they look to reform reporting and accountability systems moving forward. So with that, to give you a look into kind of how we went about producing this brief, using state report cards as well as accountability formulas, published accountability formulas from states' ESEA waiver applications, and descriptions on SEA websites. This kind of generated the data and information regarding public reporting and how states were using career indicators in their accountability formulas currently. We also identified career-focused indicators and how, we identified major trends across states after compiling the public reporting and accountability data across states. And then finally, created our existing framework for college and career readiness indicators to make sure that we were fully addressing the range of college and career readiness. So with that, I'm going to delve a little bit more into the framework itself. For those of you familiar with Achieve and familiar with our work for a number of years, what you've got before you now on the slide is a reflection of the Achieve comes rather from the Achieve and Education Trust collaboration, the 2008 Measures That Matter framework. And that really, if we think about two primary recommendations that came from that work, the first piece was really to encourage states to use multiple indicators of college and career readiness in their college and career ready accountability and public reporting systems. And what we mean by that, if you look down the rows of that grid, we're talking about course completion and success, we're talking about achievement, and we're talking about attainment. So that was the first primary recommendation. And the second big recommendation to come from that, if you will look across the columns, is to create this idea of incentivizing progress towards and beyond college and career readiness. So you can see that there's really a continuum across that grid, the progress towards college and career readiness, the meeting of college and career readiness, and finally exceeding college and career readiness. And this really creates, it serves two purposes and allows states to really create a framework for moving students towards and beyond college and career readiness. So this was the existing college and career ready framework, and now I want to give you a sense of new framework. As you can see, it gets a little bit smaller on your screen, but that is because we have added some critical new indicators to the framework in order to really beef up and reflect the important career readiness possibilities that states should be including. So within this expanded framework, you can see that there is the addition of a new row. Experiential learning is now the fourth row that you'll see on your screen. And throughout the framework, you see on your screen the and addition of, I believe it'll probably appear as light blue on your screen, but this italicized text has been added and really is meant to be additional ways to enrich your accountability and public reporting systems. And again, this isn't meant to be a formula, but really a guide for states as they work to create a coherent system of public accountability, or rather public reporting and accountability. We felt that the old framework didn't go far enough in specifying the full range of indicators to drive career prep. So importantly, this isn't something that states should be including all of these by any means, and there are certain indicators within this framework that are much better suited for public reporting and others that are better suited for inclusion within accountability systems. But there really is, depending on state context and history, et cetera, an important piece will be finding the right balance between these indicators and the uses of these indicators. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our very dear friends and colleagues, Kate Blasburn-Kramer with the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Ed Consortium, to give you a preview of the findings. Kate?
Thanks, Ray. Just to underscore, what's really exciting about the revised framework is we know this is a topic that many states are grappling with, figuring out how to measure, how to value career readiness and college career readiness. And what's really striking about the updated framework is that it doesn't pull out the career ready indicators, it doesn't put them in a separate bucket, but really embeds them throughout to really make a strong statement that it's really important that the accountability and reporting students are evaluating college and career readiness in a really comprehensive way. So that's where we're hoping we can help catalyze some change through this partnership. So really briefly, some of the major overarching trends we saw, and then I'm going to turn it over to our partners from the states. There were sort of three major trends that we identified. The first was this notion of breadth over depth. Although more than half of states are actually using at least one career-ready or career-focused readiness indicator, the majority of states we found are in fact using only one or maybe two of those career-ready indicators. There still is not really a good comprehensive use, as we'll show in a moment. The next major trend is one around what we call meta-indicators, in that largely driven by the ESEA waiver application. While many states are building a college credit indicator into their accountability system, they're doing so in a way that actually is setting up an either-or between college or career-ready indicators, or allowing students to meet this college credit indicator in a much more narrow way, and we'll show you an example of that. And finally is that we did find and really tried to highlight throughout this brief some really good models, some comprehensive approaches. States that are really leading the pack are doing something a little bit differently, a little bit more interesting. And two of those states that we're featuring happily have joined us on today's webinar, and we'll walk through one, Missouri, more from an accountability perspective, really looking at accountability system has evolved to really have a strong emphasis on college and career readiness, as well as Virginia, which is really using their public reporting both at the school level but also at the state level to really drive some change. Next. That's great. So digging into the first trend, the breadth over depth, you can see that 29 states are using public reporting in some capacity. Using career-focused indicators in one capacity, either through public reporting on their school report cards or through their accountability system, either as part of the core formula or as bonus points on top of the basic baseline formula. But as the next slide shows, when we actually pulled out all of these indicators, and these are particularly from public reporting, so you can see there are over 10 indicators here, but only a small handful of them are actually being reported by more than 5 states. So any indicator or bullet that's italicized is being publicly reported by 5 or more states. What's striking about these indicators is that they're either largely required by Perkins or already used for Perkins federal reporting, namely the first two, participation and completion. Academic career assessment is largely around work keys or ASVAB, and then dual enrollment, participation, and post-secondary enrollment rates are actually 2 indicators that we flagged for career-focused readiness, but also really are at that full college and career ready. They really bridge that divide because there's something that, given how many jobs require education training beyond high school and the importance of knowing where students are going after high school, that's something that really blends or pulls on both college credits, and those are the ones that were most common. A lot of these other ones, especially ones that sort of blend readiness or CT participation and something else, really just popped up on 1 or 2 states across the board. Next major trend is meta indicators. So this again was really, as I mentioned, really driven and accelerated by the ESEA waiver process. Right now, only 6 states actually have a standalone career ready indicator within their accountability formula. What the majority of states have done is really created these meta college career ready indicator, which in practice works in that a school will meet this indicator or will be held accountable for meeting this indicator if students demonstrate their college readiness by meeting one of multiple benchmarks. So looking at Alabama as one illustrative example, and this is something that they're phasing in the next few years, is students can demonstrate their college readiness if they do one of the following. If they meet the benchmark scores on ACTE, earn a qualifying score in AP/IB, earn dual enrollment credit, reach a benchmark level on work keys, or earn an industry credential. Challenge with this, although this is still a step forward for more states have been, the challenge with this process is that you can have a school that is meeting this accountability indicator or meeting the threshold so that students earn industry credential. You can have another school that's meeting it solely by having their students earn AP credits, just to use an example. And while that's fine, there are real policy implications to know why and what is happening within those schools. And right now, the use of meta indicator can really vary that, and more importantly, is still maintaining a choice. It's really still keeping, it's forward the system that it's college or career ready, not college and career ready as it's purporting to be. So the last trend, so the last trend I'm going to come back to, because I'm not going to talk about the states that are doing well, but rather I'm going to turn that over to states to talk about their own systems. But we conclude this policy brief with a couple of recommendations. Again, not putting forward, here's the formula to use, here's how you put the indicators together, but really recommendations for as states are approaching these tough questions, what should they be keeping in mind? So the first is the importance of multiple measures of college and career readiness. As Marie said, there's no silver bullet. There's no one indicator that will get to everything, let alone just career readiness, let alone college and career readiness. So it's really important to find those different measures that get at the really important academic, technical, and employability skills that undergird a more comprehensive approach or definition of college and career readiness. Recommendation is really about making sure that you're having good collaboration, both within the State Department of Education, between the Assessment Accountability and the CTE and College Career Readiness Bureaus, as well as those outside of the SEA, from community colleges, from workforce development, to make sure that you're really having the right conversation, you're prioritizing the right information, the right indicators. And again, the two states that we're having today are a great example of this really working, and we'll get into that in a moment. Finally, the last two are really about finding the appropriate balance of uses, and this is really about prioritizing which indicators make more sense or more viable for reporting versus accountability. One that we flagged is those indicators around experiential learning are really important. May not be appropriate for an accountability system, but could have real value in a public reporting as far as shining a light on which schools, which districts are really doing a good job of bringing those opportunities for those experiences. And of course, reporting and accountability system are not particularly useful unless they're really informing decisions. And really, being able to ask the right questions, get the right information to answer those questions, and really drive the change that a state wants to see in terms of student outcomes. So with that, I'm going to turn this over first to Missouri, Dennis Cooper and Dennis Harden, who are from the Accountability Division as well as the CTE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Again, is our second recommendation about really opportunities for the accountability divisions and CT divisions to work together. This is Partnership in Action, where we have the two Dennises from those two divisions coming together to share what Missouri has been doing now on their fifth iteration of their accountability system that continues to evolve to really better value and promote college readiness. And then we'll come back and hear from Deborah in Virginia.
Kate. This is Dennis Harden, and I'm coordinator of career education here at the department. And first of all, I was just going to talk just very briefly about kind of where we've been with the whole notion of careerness in our accountability system. Then I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Cooper to talk a little about what our current measures are for college and career readiness. Prior to this whole notion of college and career readiness, we've been fortunate in Missouri that career and technical education has always been a part of the Missouri School Improvement Program, which is our state school accountability system. The MSIP cycles not only included performance standards, which for career and technical education was primarily our placement indicators, but we also had process standards and resource standards. The process standards were those types of standards and indicators that were primarily focused around curriculum and instruction and things that schools needed to do as they went about their daily business. And we used to utilize these standards and indicators as the basis for on-site reviews. I also had resource standards which were focused on things such as teacher-student ratios, guidance counselor student ratios, administrator student ratios, current technical education courses offered, etc. We have resource standards, but they serve more as a guide for best practices. So when we move to MSIP 5, which is our most current cycle for school accountability, which we base primarily now on performance indicators, which include the new college and career readiness standards. I think this is where we were beginning to put the whole notion of college readiness and including the career readiness standards in with that, such as our placement, IRC, and those kind of indicators. So I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Cooper, and he's going to talk a little bit about our MSIP 5 performance indicators for college and career readiness.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share what we're doing in Missouri. I'm a former school superintendent who prepared districts for our accountability system, and I now work for the department and see it from a somewhat different perspective. I think the big question was, as we transferred from our MSIP cycles to our current cycle, which is actually our fifth cycle of MSIP, and other cycles have all been 5 years, so you can see we're well into accountability and how we measure effectiveness. But here was, how do we measure college and career readiness within these indicators? So we'll see as we outline these indicators that we're not just looking at career education. We're not just looking at those students who are going to 4 colleges. We want to know that all of our students graduate from high school ready for college and careers. So we basically have 3 indicators. They're measured in different ways. That's why you see in the first indicator, indicators 1 through 3, they're basically one indicator of whether or not the student can demonstrate the knowledge necessary to be successful in their post-secondary college or career training. And we measure those in a variety of ways. Students can take the ACT, SAT, Compass, or the ASVAB, and then if they meet state standards or show progress, or the percent of graduated who participate meet a certain level, then they meet that criteria. This indicator is worth 10 out of 140 points in our scoring guide. Each student can earn 1 point by participating and earning a certain score on any one of these indicators of college and career readiness. We have added one that will be added to our scoring guide for the 14-15 school year. That is work keys. So we're using, in 14-15 we'll be using ACT, SAT, ASVAB, or work keys. And I also mentioned that our state legislature has approved appropriation to provide ACT universally to all students in the spring of their junior year. So each student will have access to participate in the ACT. Our indicator of knowledge. Our next indicator, if you'll go to indicator 4, is an indicator of can the student demonstrate the skills to be ready for the next level of what they choose to do. So we're looking at the percent of graduates who earned a qualifying score on an advanced placement, an international baccalaureate program, Project Lead the Way, or an industry-recognized credential. Also, they could have received college credit through early college dual enrollment, or approved dual credit courses. And we score this. The student may have taken an advanced placement course. They may have also taken industry-recognized credential. They may have earned college credit through a dual enrollment course. They may have done a variety of those things, but each student will earn a point in the scoring guide based on best score within any of those indicators. Our third indicator of college career readiness is placement data. There are two different ways that we measure this, and we give the district a credit for this. But primarily we're looking at the percent of graduates who in post-secondary education, either through college, 2-year college, career technical training, or students who are in the military within 6 months of graduating, or a student who into a career-related job placement. And so we measure placement in one of those three ways. So some of the things that we've changed, and I mentioned a couple of those. We are adding work keys in the 2014-15 school year. We're in our second year of MSIP 5, and already we've transitioned from technical skill attainment to industry-recognized credentials because of the rigor involved. It's our finding early on that sometimes the TSAs were not provide a high level of rigor, not necessarily strong indicators of the student's readiness for post-secondary work, nor were the workforce partners as eager to accept the TSA as they were an industry-recognized credential. So we have shifted from TSAs to IRCs, and as I already mentioned, we will be giving the ACT to all juniors in the spring of 2015. And finally, some of the challenges, and Dennis Harden's going to speak to you about some of the challenges that we found.
Okay, probably with regard to the IRCs, and Dennis already mentioned this, was the rigor of the IRCs, also the availability of IRCs for every CTE program, as well as the cost of IRCs. So one of the things that we've been working on to address the rigor of IRCs is we have a very rigorous, we consider to be rigorous application process that schools, if they want an IRC added to our approved list, must go through and we add those. We'll have a committee that reviews those requests, and we add those based on their responses to our application. The other challenge is when we added the IRC piece in with the ACT, SAT, so forth, was that this felt like all CTE students should obtain an IRC, and we had to explain to them that we put it in with the advanced placement, and that it was holding students to a higher standard, and that not all students may be able to achieve an IRC because due to the rigor and that sort of thing. So we had to work really hard with school districts to understand that, number one, there isn't an IRC for every single CTE program, and two, that it's a standard that's over and above similar student receiving advanced placement or IB coursework. And then finally, we have had some recent legislation that was just passed. Our session ended a couple weeks ago. One of the things that came about with Senate Bill 701 was that it removed our term related from the placement requirement. One of our senators and several of our senators and representatives were getting feedback that all training had to be specifically related in order for them to get credit for MSIP. So the related was taken out of that requirement. Also, we had a change in our graduation policy through House Bill 1189, which allowed a CTE course to substitute for an academic course in English language arts, math, social studies, or science. The one caveat in this was that the substitution, the academic course being substituted, could not have an end-of-course statewide assessment attached to it. So those were some of the challenges that we faced most recently with regard to adding these college and career readiness measures.
One of the things that this is Dennis Cooper, I'm sorry. One of the things that we're pleased about in our scoring guide, however, is that 140 points possible in our overall scoring guide, 30 points are directly related to college and career readiness. And we think that sends a very strong message to our districts that we want every student to graduate ready for some type of post-secondary academic training or military or placement, and that they're prepared to be successful at whatever they pursue after high school. So we're very pleased with that. We're continuing to look at it and see where we need to make adjustments and modifications so that we can make it more meaningful for school districts. And that we have.
Well, thank you, Dennis and Dennis. Next, we're going to move back to the East Coast and have Deborah Jonas from the Virginia Department of Education, who's a special advisor for research and planning, talk about use of CT credentials within their reporting system.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I'm actually here on behalf of the CTE office today. Lolita Hall, our director, was not able to join the webinar. And so I wanted to share a bit about the history of our career credentialing initiative in Virginia and some changes it's driven on the ground and how it's woven in public reporting and a bit in the accountability system. So back in 2003, 2004, we already had several of our schools using industry credentialing tests within our CTE programs, and we were also moving towards a place in the statewide accountability system where high school students would need to pass statewide assessments in order to graduate from high school. And within the accountability system, the clause that allows schools to use board or substitute tests in lieu of the state-developed assessments in order to graduate. And in that same year, the board issued guidance to use industry credentials as substitutes for certain tests that are required for students to earn Virginia's standard diploma. And there are some limits on what the industry credential test can substitute for. So there is a student-selected test that they need to pass. It could also substitute for a science or history test. And we talk of those in Virginia as verified credits, the idea being that an assessment verifies that the content of a course and the learning that goes on in that course is aligned with state standards and expectations. What was happening is this combination of new graduation requirements, some existing local efforts, and really interest in continuing those local efforts, and the need to ensure that students had access to a valid exam that reflected their CTE program really converged at a time that allowed the state to move forward and really bring industry credentialing to the forefront of career and technical education programs. So in 2006-07, Virginia funded a pilot, and it was actually a blend of funds that school divisions could use to really, and the idea was let's encourage our schools to use industry credentialing tests to see what they're about, to help them understand how to strengthen their programs so students could pass them, so that when the new accountability requirement hit, they were able to use these as they felt appropriate for students to substitute for the state-required graduation test. We've had that in place for several years, and it's worked really well, and there really has been a tremendous interest in having more students earn these credentials, particularly within CTE programs. The more recent change was that in 2011, the Virginia General Assembly passed legislation that requires all students who started ninth grade for the first time this year, who earned our standard diploma, to pass a credentialing test. And we have an advanced studies diploma in Virginia, and the coursework within that diploma is more consistent with minimum college entry requirements. So that is a place where Virginia is still sort of the advanced studies diploma being a college-ready diploma, and the standard diploma being thought of as more of a career-ready diploma. As we move through the slides, I'll show you how we're really encouraging, from a reporting and accountability perspective, encouraging our schools to move so that all students have access to opportunities that enable them to graduate with both college and career-ready skills. Next slide. Thanks. This slide shows the criteria for using credentialing exams to substitute for other state-required exams for graduation. And these 4 points are actually consistent with the substitute test, whether it's an industry credential or another test that can substitute for an academic assessment for the state, such as advanced placement test, the SAT writing or ACT test. They all have to fall within criteria, and the board approves a list of substitute tests on an annual basis. And for credentialing exams, we're often adding new tests, but as tests are no longer offered, or our experts feel like they're not aligned with the expected content, sometimes they're removed from the list as well. Next slide. So we take multiple approaches to accountability and sort of ensuring that the public and policymakers know where we are with respect to credentialing. I'll talk about 3 different types: how we do this on school report cards, how we build this into our annual performance reports, which go to the board. So there's there's a piece of this that's integrated with the Board of Education's work, and then legislative activities. Next slide, please. Thanks. The state report card in Virginia has included information about industry credentials for some time. We report this information in 2 different ways. One is we report the number of actual credentials that students earn each year by the 4 categories. You can see on the slide: state licensure, industry certification, workplace readiness, and the NASDCTEc skills assessments. And as many of you probably know, oftentimes students earn more than 1 credential. They'll pass more than 1 exam in the course of a school year. And so that reflects the actual credentials that students earn. We also began reporting a few years ago the number of individual students who earn credentials each year, which is a smaller number because it's unduplicated. And we thought that this was important, not only at the state level, but it also helps encourage our schools to really make sure that all of their students have opportunities to earn credentials, and not just count the numbers, where we may have some students earning 3 or 4 or more in a given year and other students earning none. So we wanted to look at the individuals as well as the number of credentials. Next slide, please. Thank you. We also take a slightly different approach in our annual Perkins reporting. We, of course, have the core indicators that the state works to negotiate with the federal government. But we also, within our Perkins reporting at the state level and at the district level, include, really want to encourage local leaders to strengthen all of our CTE programs so that all of our students graduate for careers and college, not one or the other. We've been doing some research here in Virginia since about 2007 to understand what the Virginia-specific indicators of college and career readiness are, it was initially focused on the college side in large part because of easier access to data. And the research that we've done for several years consistently shows that Virginia's Advanced Studies Diploma is a good predictor of whether students enroll in college, enroll directly into credit-bearing courses, and are successful in first-year courses. But we've got some new research coming out that actually looks at success 4 years out, and the Advanced Studies Diploma is a good predictor of that as well. And so that information, we established an informational indicator in our Perkins reporting that is weekly informational indicator, and it really looks at the percentage of CTE completers who graduated both career and college ready. And this is in our state and our local performance reports, and it looks at those students who earned both an industry credential and advanced studies diploma. And the idea is we can, by tracking that particular indicator, which we view as both college and career ready, it's a way for schools to monitor their students, are when they graduate, and really work towards increasing their programs and encouraging more students to really graduate with both college and career skills. We also use the opportunity of the annual report, which needs to go to the board for approval. We really leverage that opportunity to have good conversations with the state board to both enhance the visibility of CTE programs, but also work with them to make sure that the work within CTE is aligned with broader state goals for college and career readiness and other activities that are going on outside of the CTE programs. And we find that that's been very helpful, both in terms of state policy, but also ensuring that our schools understand the importance of that informational indicator. As I mentioned earlier, we've got some more recent legislation that added a career industry credential to the standard diploma, and that goes into effect for first-time ninth graders this year. A lot of pieces of the puzzle that made this possible. One was the availability and accessibility of the Virginia Workforce Readiness Skills Assessment. So this is an assessment that Virginia worked with experts to create to be a more general skills measure that the state was very comfortable with adding as a graduation requirement. It's also, I don't know the cost, I apologize off the top of my head, but it's affordable. We also have partnerships with some private sector companies who offer low-cost assessments for some industry credentials, and that has made a huge difference in our ability to put these policies in place. We also have state funding for industry credentialing programs and assessments at the local level, which helps. In terms of the legislation that is in effect for this year's ninth graders, we encourage our schools to actually implement that requirement for standard diploma earners earlier so that we can have greater confidence that our graduates leave college with meaningful credentials. This slide shows sort of the number of credentials that our students earn. This is the duplicated count since 2008-9, which is the first year we had individual student-level data on this. You can see starting in 2011 was the first year that we actually separated workplace readiness from other types of assessments, but we've had tremendous growth in the use of industry credentials in a very short period of time by having these multiple approaches to reporting and accountability in place. We also have several programs that support our schools directly from the state, including the creation of STEM academies, which are required to integrate workplace and academic skills so that kids graduate ready for college and careers. They also integrate dual enrollment or AP courses developed collaboratively with higher education and the business community so they meet local employer demands. We have similar academies, which are health science academies, and we implemented the requirement that all middle school students have an academic and career plan not just within CTE, but statewide for all students, that really requires our schools to work with students and their families to develop a program of study from middle school and beyond, to out where they're headed and the kinds of classes that they need to be successful and the kind of achievement within those classes that our students need to reach to meet their goals. And with that, the CTE office here in Virginia has worked to develop program study and career pathways that support the ability to complete the academic and career, the ACP that students have to complete before they leave middle school. Next slide. So I've listed some resources here, and while we were on this webinar today, I actually thought of a few more that I'll send to the hosts of the webinar, including links to our STEM academies and health science academies, because they embed sort of ideal CTE course requirements, which include both the rigorous academic content, the technical skills and workplace skills are all, the structure of those programs is designed to integrate all of those into a single high school program of study for students. And I think several folks might be interested in looking at those. That's all. My last slide is just, if you have questions, your best bet is actually to contact Lolita Hall, the director of our CTE office here in Virginia. And I work with Lolita quite a bit, but she and her staff are really the experts who can provide you with the most reliable and detailed information.
Okay, thank you so much, Deborah. And thank you also to Dennis Cooper and Dennis Harden. At this time, we'll open the lines to Q&A. So I'll actually turn it over to Jeanette, who can give instructions on how to do that.
Thank you. We'll now begin the question and answer session. If you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If to be removed from the queue, please press the pound sign or the hash key. There will be a delay before the first question is announced. If you're using a speakerphone, you may need to pick up the handset first before pressing the numbers. Once you have a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. And we have a question from Michelle Louis. Please go ahead.
This is Michelle Louis calling from the Colorado Department of Education. I just had a question, really, I guess, for folks in Missouri and Virginia, how you got to your definition, or if you have a definition of industry-recognized credential, and if there's like a specific list that's been created in your state for board-approved credentials.
We did develop, we had a committee of folks that came in and assisted us in developing a definition for industry-recognized credential. And, we have a list that we put out. The current list is on our website, and it lists what the test is, and then we list it whether it counts for ESA for Perkins purposes or it's IRC for the ESIP 5 IRC purposes. They can count for both in many instances. For instance, if it has an IRC, it would also count for Perkins. But many of our TSAs that we use for Perkins that don't have an IRC do not meet the IRC requirement for MSIP 5.
And in Virginia, we have a review process. All of the tests need to meet the criteria that were in the presentation, and the list goes to the board at least once a year for updates. So we add and remove tests as appropriate, and there's a review process that the department spearheads
to make sure that those tests are aligned with course expectations and outcomes, but they do have to be independently scored. And the sort of vision behind them is that they have some type of external validity to them. So they're different from the local skills attainment measure that has been in place for a long time within our CTE programs. And the list is available on the web. I can send a link to that to the Achieve folks.
Great. Thanks, Deb and Dennis. It's just a little bit of a follow-up to Michelle's question. Is the demand for the addition of an IRC to your state-approved list, does that primarily tend to come from the district or from a particular partnership with business? Where are you seeing, demands for inclusion of additional IRCs?
In Missouri, we've seen it from both sides. We had school districts that request something to be added so that it's available to their students. Also, I've been contacted by various associations and vendors about considering their tests to add to our industry-recognized credential list.
And I believe the same is true in Virginia.
Thank you.
And I'll add that for us, the development of the workplace readiness skills assessment was really critical to meet this need and enable the legislation requiring a credential within the standard diploma. But we wouldn't have been able to successfully implement that legislation without that additional assessment. And it's in part because, as the Missouri folks pointed out earlier, there's not an industry credential available for every program of study that students are involved in, or sometimes there is a credential, but there's an age requirement for students to participate, and some of our students graduate at 17 and that age requirement is 18, or perhaps you need more post-secondary training or education to participate in that assessment, and so having this additional measure available was really critical for us.
Thanks. And this is Ann Bowles quickly at Achieve. We've had a couple questions come in about the availability of the webinar slides themselves. And just a reminder that the slides will be posted on our website, achieve.org/meetings-webinars, and you will be able to download them there. We'll also have a recording of the webinar there as well. And then, Michelle, to your question in Colorado, also, if you aren't able to track down the resources that Dennis mentioned on the Missouri website, feel free to email us at Achieve and we can help make that connection as well. Do we have any other questions? We just have about 5 minutes left.
No further questions at this time.
Okay, I think with that we will give people back the gift of 4 minutes, which I know you can get a lot done in 4 minutes. So thank you all so very much for joining us. A special thanks again to Dennis Hardin with the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Deborah Jonas with the Virginia Department of Education, as well as Kate Blazern-Kramer and Marie O'Hara. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You now disconnect.